Mónica Ramirez, what a magnificent moment and place to be with you. Right now we're celebrating the first Raizado festival within the Latinx movement that you have started. Tell us, how did you come up with this incredible project?
Well, first, thank you for being part of this first of many. It's so important that we're doing this because, well, for many reasons, but one of the reasons is, most people don't realize, Lydia, that this beautiful gathering was really born from a lot of pain. The idea for the Raizado Festival emerged because there were so many people in our community who were dying from COVID. And I remember having a conversation with Olga about it, and I said, if we're going to change things, and if we're actually going to save Latinx people's lives, we have to do something that is so big that it can't be missed. It's got to be something that is so unique and so special that people aren't going to be able to look the other way. Because I don't think that we would have lost so many people during the pandemic if for years and years and decades before there hadn't been so many failures, right? Like policy failures, lack of investment, and all of these, things that have caused some of the problems that led to so many lives being lost. And so it was born from pain, but it's really about joy and celebration and lifting up our strength and our power and making sure that people understand that there are 62 million Latinx people in the United States, and every single one of us is making a difference in our own way. So we chose this beautiful place to do this wonderful festival, and it's been 2.5 years in the making, and we're just really grateful that you're here with us and that you're part of it.
Thank you so much. But this is not the first thing you do, obviously. How long have you been an activist?
Oh, well, I started as an activist when I was 14. I was just a kid. And I think all of us in our own way, we're activists. There are things that we care about and that we get upset about and that we want to take action on. And for me, I was a 14-year-old kid, and I wanted to make sure that farm workers, the community that I come from, that they weren't being ignored. And so I started then, and I haven't stopped.
But you always link everything that is important in life. Since the first time I met you, I was so at awe at your work and the way you improvise and you create and you teach other people to do work like human rights that include everyone. Not only obviously based on Latinx communities, but also includes everyone else. And that's really amazing. And I always wanted to ask you, how did you not lose that 14-year-old girl that lives within you, that is still a rebel and wants to keep on going? Because a lot of people ask that, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people just lose paths and then just move away from that energy, that is hopeful energy. And that's what I think your work everywhere in human trafficking, for fair wages, for everything that you do is just based on that, on hopeful results.
Well, thank you. And I have the same question for you, right? But I think it's because, first of all, the work that we do, the work that I do, the work that you've done, it's about our lives in some ways, and the people who are in our lives who we care about, and a fundamental belief that we should have better and that people should have better and that things can change. And, I think we share something in that we have parents who made us believe that we could make a difference. And so I feel like I was raised to be who I am, and there was never a question in my mind that I couldn't make a difference, because my parents told me that I could and that I needed to, because that was the obligation to give back, right? And also, for so many years I spent litigating cases on behalf of women who were victims of sexual violence, and those are very difficult cases. It's very hard on your heart. The work is very hard on our hearts, and people will ask me, like, how have you stayed in it? How have you been able to stay in it? And I think you have to focus on the possibility of change. Like, we can't focus on the pain, because I feel like if we focus on the pain, then we actually can't get past it. And so I think in my work, I've just really stayed grounded in community and in the true belief that we can make things better. And so that's kept me going. But what about you? I mean, you have a similar story.
Well, yes. When I was 12 years old, I knew I was a feminist back in Mexico City, because my mom was a feminist. She was a psychologist, an activist. And it's pretty much the same thing. Every time I complain, and I used to complain a lot, I still do. My mom used to tell me, okay, that's fine. You're seeing a problem like poverty and hunger or inequality or sexism or any kind of violence. But you have to ask yourself, what can you do about it? And I remember answering, it's like, I'm a 12-year-old. What can I do about it? It's nothing, right? I'm just a girl. And she said, you have to find a way. Talk to people. So I started talking to little kids in the poorest communities where she was working with the mothers. And I remember this changed my life forever as a feminist, because we were in this very poor area outside Mexico City in the outskirts called Ciudades Perdidas, the lost cities.
Oh, wow.
And she was working with the women, talking about their rights and how to, get the possibility to be educated and all that. And she put me and my brothers and sisters to play with the kids. And she said, if you don't play with the children, the mothers cannot learn anything, because we are the sole responsible people for taking care of the kids, the children. So that's when I learned this, is inequality does that to you in real life. That's it, that's fact, right?
Yeah.
So I took it from there, and I've never stopped. And I agree with you, because when long time ago in Cancun, back in Cancun, Mexico, I opened a shelter for victims of human trafficking. I remember a lot of friends, writers or activists or people from the entertainment businesses wanted to give to our organization, went to the shelter. And every time they came out, they were like, oh my God, it's such a hopeful place. I thought I was gonna go in and see these kids crying, the children, the boys and girls crying, or the women just like in a really bad situation. And people are just so hopeful, rebuilding their lives, right? Yeah. And that's it. That's what we do. I guess it's, you think big, but then you work in your community. You do step by step every day. Or otherwise, you would just stay depressed forever.
Yeah, or you feel like it's so big that you can't actually move it. It feels like this big mountain that can't be moved. But when you start person to person, so much of my work has been about people, person to person, making change, listening to stories, telling stories. And I think, the other thing I really love about you and appreciate about you is that the stories that you tell are the stories of people in their power, right? Not the stories that a lot of people want to tell, which is always like the worst stories that have happened to people, but really like, how have people used their power to change their lives? What made you decide to focus your writing in that way?
I guess when I became a journalist, my editor was sending me to cover things from the perspective of the powerful always. And ever since the first investigative report that I did like 35 years ago, I understood that the community had a lot of things to do, especially women and children. And I wanted to portray that in the newspaper, and my editor was not happy about it, because it was another narrative. So I guess I was one of the first group of female journalists in Mexico that changed the narrative within the local newspapers, because I was working in the Southeast. And from there, I started investigating. And I always noticed when they covered any crime, the newspapers, of human trafficking, or violence against, gender violence of any kind, or violence against children, they always told the names of the victims and never of the victimaries, because it was illegal, right? So first we work on the legal side, as you had, obviously, to change the laws to protect the victims. But then I decided I was going to become an expert on investigating organized crime and corrupted politicians. And that's what I do now, 35 years later. And many politicians and policemen in jail, incarcerated because of their crimes. And I'm so proud of that, because we needed to tell the names of these guys that were doing that, because they do it from the top of the pyramid. And that's the only way to help people understand how victims everywhere feel so powerless in front of this strength, no?
It's so important because, as a survivor and as people who worked with survivors, people who survive violence are often made to feel ashamed of something that's been done to them, as opposed to the people who actually did the terrible thing to them taking responsibility and being held accountable in that way. I mean, you've changed the law, you've changed people's lives. I mean, around the world, not just in Mexico. And I think one of the things that people don't talk enough about is the reality for female journalists, and how in Mexico, by bringing to light some of the harms against them, you've also changed that reality too. What do you feel has progressed since some of the violence against journalists has been brought to light?
Well, I think that it's quite complex, because a lot of us are still persecuted by the powerful, especially people in government.
Yeah.
Obviously the mafias. If you investigate the mafias, they want to kill you, at least me. They've been trying to kill me for years and years, and they haven't been able, because I put some of them in jail, or I run at the right moment. And I never stay. I never try to play, like a hero or anything. If I know I have to flee because these guys want to kill me, I just do. But the other thing is, a lot of my friends, journalists, have been assassinated in Mexico and all over Latin America, and now in other countries. And that's a fact. It's terrible. But the reason why they are being persecuted and killed, it's because they're doing an incredibly good work to show how pervasive corruption is within the political system. So we are being able to show people, our readers and the people who see what we produce on TV, from the form of documentaries or even on TV and the news, we try to explain them from a different perspective. How you can, by understanding reality, you can change things. You can participate in change. It's not only to sit down and see how horrific it is and turn off the TV and say, okay, I can't do anything. I guess that's something that we both do together in exactly the same way, as if we trained in the same place, which is our heart. Because we always look for the hope in the solutions for everything we do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about the project that I started, The Humans Who Feed Us, and that project, which is a narrative and a portrait project, for me that project is so important, because for so many of the clients that I've represented, for so many of the people who come from the farm worker community like I do, I just feel like a lot of the journalists and other people who are trying to tell their stories, it's always like, people are suffering. And people are suffering every single day, all around the world. People are suffering. But behind that suffering, there's resilience and strength and courage and beauty and love. And so for me, it's so important that we tell those stories too, because first of all, it's the truth. But also, the people who are having their stories told, they're consuming the stories that are being told about them too. And so if the only stories that are being told about them are reflecting the worst things that have ever happened to them, I feel like that's harmful for them to have to consume those stories over and over again. I mean, they live their lives. They know it's hard. So for me, I feel like we have this incredible opportunity to lift up the power and the joy and the possibility. And I feel like that's sort of the uncovered gem, right? And I feel like you and I have had the chance to be able to really kind of look deep and figure out a way to bring that to the surface.
And thinking about how we use words and how we have changed narrative, and a lot of activists that are going to be in this event and that work with the Latinx community all year long, is a lot of people used to say the hands who feed us, and I love the way you change it to the humans who feed us. Because when I met you a long time ago, when we were doing the special on the Me Too movement and all that, I remember being an admirer of your work and your colleagues' work on the farm workers community. Because a lot of people don't get it, that when you talk about farm workers, you're not talking about them, you've been talking with them to tell their stories of power, and they have fed the world right now. With the pandemic, we saw it.
Yeah.
The ones that were there, risking their lives in the same conditions they did previously, they saved us. And it's so beautiful to tell it from that perspective, and I celebrate that, and I hope everybody knows and learns about this project, the Humans Who Feed Us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's, I got to see the faces of the people who were profiled, because we've done exhibits now in different places, and to see them see themselves, it's incredible, you know, in a beautiful portrait, and to see people coming to see their portrait and to read their story. It's just, I feel like we get to do magic in a way, you know, and I love that about the work that we do. Even though we're doing the work differently, we're doing that. And for you, what is your hope? What do you hope people will learn from you and from your work? And also, you know, what are your hopes for the future and the overall gender justice work that you've been doing?
Well, after 35 years working as a journalist and a human rights activist, and having been, you know, right now I'm living in exile in Spain because of the actual Mexican government and the political corruption with human traffickers. I'll be back eventually, hopefully, one day. But what I would hope to share with people is the fact that if we don't look at reality, we will let the very few bad guys win. There are very few, I swear there are, because I've been documenting violence around the world for years and years, and you can see how many amazing people around the world, young people, are just striving to change people's life and saving each other and helping each other. So good people are everywhere. The bad guys are in certain places where we can find, at least I can find them. So that's what I hope people learn, that you can do this kind of job that I do as a journalist and an expert in organized crime, violence against women and children, in such a way that you have hope and you share that hope. And I know I've been victimized by the state. I was tortured, incarcerated, and all that. But that doesn't define me. That's a part of my life, and that talks, as you said, about them more than it talks about me. Is they're so afraid of me, a single Mexican woman, a good reporter, that they've been trying to kill me for 16 years. And instead, I have put in jail so many traffickers and torturers and violent men and women, of course. So I'm really proud of my work, and I hope that the new generations just learn how to be human rights journalists and go there and talk to the people everywhere. And that's my hope, that we don't lose, you know, the ideals, and just go for it, you know, fight for it.
I'm just so honored to know you, and I'm always so inspired by you, and I hope that you know how many people love you and care about you and are rooting for you and are so grateful, because I'm sure as you do your work, you maybe don't realize that you have really changed the world, but you have, and I'm really thankful for all that you've done and all that you continue to do.
Thank you, and I'm so grateful to know you, to learn from you, from all the projects that you do. So let's keep working together and then celebrate the Latinx community together.
I agree. That's a pact.
Yes, it is.